Okay, welcome everybody. We have organised this Zoom chat to talk to Matt and Ricardo about their experiences of recording songs of isolation during the pandemic, in the middle of the pandemic, which was the recording session was last November. I remember that day as a particular day right in the middle of everything, setting everything up, playing, organising and seeing the musicians play for the first time in front of other people and with other people for many months. So I think it'd be very interesting to hear from both of you, Ricardo and Matt, about how you found that really. I mean, both in terms of, the logistics of getting to the venue, what you need to think about, and then the practicalities of setting up and how you felt and what it meant to you to be involved, and also, of course, about how you came to be involved in the project in the first place, and what it meant to you to take part. So, I don't know, Matt, do you want to go first with a few thoughts?
Yeah, well, I became involved because Adrian gave me a call, and we were at the academy together many moons ago, and so it was great to hear from him. And I think it was it postponed or something like that because he contacted me quite some time before it actually happened, and then we weren't even sure if it could go ahead. I think it was at the end of November.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so we were able to travel if it was for work purposes, but we were well into the second lockdown. Um, so it was all a bit touch and go, but it could go ahead. And I mean, I used to be on a train every other day going somewhere, and I don't think I've been on a train for a few months. So yeah, it was slightly strange. Basically it was empty, and then um, coming across London, eerily quiet. Um, but there was also, interestingly, once we all arrived at the venue and masks on and socially distant, but once one sat down, there was also something quite normal and very familiar in the unfamiliarity, and something kind of very comforting about that, because I think all of us have, as artists, have felt a degree of can I still do this? Do I still know the ropes? When you've been out of the saddle for a while. So it was great just to start playing and realize that, yeah, this is what I do. I do know what I'm doing. And as far as a recording session goes, there was much that was familiar, but it was everything around it that was unfamiliar.
yeah. No, that's true. You came down from Norwich, I think, didn't you, Matt?
Yeah, I live in
Yeah,
Norwich, so
yeah,
yeah, traveling's normally not a big deal at all, but it felt like much more shaky ground, the traveling aspect. Yeah, which is strange because it's normally so yeah, one is blasé about these things, but
yeah.
yeah, but it was just great to I haven't got very much involved in online streaming or that kind of stuff. I think that music is something you do with other people and in a live situation, unless it's a recording. But still, I haven't got very enthusiastic about the whole streamer concept from your bedroom stuff. Not saying it's wrong, but it's not for me. Um, so I did really enjoy making music with people for real.
Okay, thanks. What about you, Ricardo? Did
Yeah,
you have similar types of experiences?
similar, but the journey for me was a lot longer. It was 3 hours and a half by train to get to London from Devon. So I was very panicky, very panicky. At one time, I considered driving, just to keep the distance from everybody and not run the risk of being in a train with others. But driving would mean I would get there exhausted already, and after a long recording, I would have to drive back, and I didn't want a car crash. So I bit the bullet and I said, I'm going to book this train ticket and go. But luckily, like Matt said, the carriage was empty. Well, nearly empty. There was one or two other only. But it was tough, keeping the mask throughout this journey and then keeping the mask in the recording session. Yes, but it was well worth it. And of course, when I got to Paddington, I decided to avoid buses, taxi, and I walked to the venue and I walked back to Paddington.
Really? You walked all that?
Yeah, well, it's half an hour walk. It was quite all right. But yeah, I prefer to walk to be safe.
I remember it was seriously cold, wasn't it? It was a cold day, and the church was it was incredibly cold. I remember, I think towards the end of the session, we were all pretty numb temperature wise.
Yes, the church was heated, so it wasn't absolutely
Apparently.
freezing. It was just very, very, very cold. Sorry.
That's what musicians are sort of used to in a way, isn't it? Going in a church. I mean,
I think
yeah.
One of the things that we couldn't have tea and coffee and that sort of thing, could we? Because of all the restrictions. So no warm drinks.
Yeah, everybody had to be self-sufficient for that, and you had to kind of stay in your little
Area.
circle, in a little area, unless you needed the loo or something. Yeah. Ricardo, what about when you sat at the harpsichord and played? What was the experience there? Because you hadn't played with other people for a while as well, had you?
For quite a while. Oh, well before the lockdown started, my chamber music had already reduced a lot since moving to Devon, and so for me already it's just something extraordinary. The fact of I've been doing chamber music or orchestral music in an ensemble. I've been doing solo stuff and a lot more of dancing and choreographing because there is a field for that and less people doing it. So practicality dictates and demand and offer dictates what I do the most. So it was a double joy for me to be doing the Continuo. But as Matt said, there is that, you sit there and you think, can I do this? And all of a sudden, when it starts and the music starts to roll, you feel more comfortable, a lot more comfortable with it. One thing that I found, if we may go already into the difficulties of which each of us felt, I'm used when working with singers, and I'm not sure, perhaps Matt is the same. I'm used to working with singers separately, just the Continuo and the singers. So it was not only the tension of being aggregated to the orchestra for the recording, that there was a long session of rehearsal that was comforting. But it was not only that, but some uncertainty of not having worked with the singers beforehand. But what we did was enough, and the singers are professionals, of course, so we all came together. But that caused some anxiety, just a little anxiety.
Yeah, I suppose we didn't have the opportunity to really get the Continuo together with the singers beforehand. I think part of that was just budgetary reasons, but part of it was just because both of you guys come from outside of London and different places, all sorts of logistical things that it was impossible to do when we just had that day. What about? But yeah, I think we had enough time to work that things could be tried out a little bit as well. I mean, I don't know how you guys found the social distancing, and I'm also interested to hear about Adaq, because I know Adaq, you had to change quite a lot about the way you work normally pre-COVID, and by the time we did the session, you had already done a few socially distanced recordings, which involves a completely different setup. I mean, you're the one to talk about that, not me. But somehow I wonder if for Ricardo and Matt, that wasn't so much an issue, because you guys have a harpsichord and theorbo, and you're probably used to being a little bit further apart from other people anyway. But the placing of where you were was also very interesting, with the orchestra, the entire orchestra on one side, and the singers behind you or to one side. So you kind of the ham in the other musicians' sandwich, spatially. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear what you three have to say about your how that whole thing, how you felt about those moving parts.
Yeah, I think it wasn't very much different. Like you said, the group was more spread out than it would be normally. So one has to adjust one's hearing a little bit spatially. But no, apart from that, I think that I didn't find that was such a big deal. It wasn't, like you said, theorbo and harpsichord, there's normally a bit of space around those instruments anyway. I think the strange thing was you couldn't really go up and talk to people in the break like you normally do, catch up with people. Everyone stayed at their station and was very aware also of having to do that for your own safety and for everybody else, following the guidelines. But yeah, the music, transcended any of those barriers.
Yeah, I felt I agree with Matt, but I would have loved the main continuo cello to be a lot closer.
Yeah.
My positioning in relation to Matt, it was okay. I was in front of you, Matt, so I could hear immediately your attack. So it was a lot easier to respond, and we were sort of quite together. But the cellist, he was considerably further away.
I seem to remember we made a change on the day, because I think originally we'd planned to have first, seconds, violas, cellos left to right, but we made a last minute plan to have the cellos closer to you, I think, didn't we? And we had the violas on the outside position, which probably helped a tiny bit, but that they would still have had to have been 2 meters from you, wouldn't they?
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
So what changes did you have to make, Adaq, from the recording perspective?
The changes from the recording point of view are quite dramatic. I think it's the changes. It's as big as the change you all have to make as players in adjusting for timing and compensating for not being able to hear necessarily whether you're always in time with other performers. But from our perspective, when you, especially with string players, when you spread them out, you really lose the focus in the sound. So the hardest thing with all of the socially distant recordings is trying to get a good string sound. And I still don't think there's an ideal solution for it. I think the only way to really get that amazing string sound back is to bring the musicians closer together. But there are some other interesting things which have come out of the distancing. One is that using a smaller number of string players but spreading them out actually sounds like a slightly larger ensemble, and that's simply because they're physically taking up more space. So because they're physically taking up more space, and whatever you do with your microphone setup, that they're filling the acoustic in a different way, and you recognize that from all the previous recordings you've heard as being an ensemble which is larger, because you hear it as in relation to the acoustic in that way. So in some ways that's useful, because you can create the impression of a larger string ensemble, but then the challenge is trying to get that unified sound with the focus, but without then having to use too much of the close spot microphones for the detail. But so sort of integrating those two sounds to make it sound like no one's sticking out, you haven't highlighted one player. Yeah, I still think there isn't really an ideal solution, but we have come up with various different ways of trying to kind of create that impression of a unified string sound.
I thought you got a great sound, but what did you do that was different? Yeah,
that's I think, as I would always say, that it always comes down to the quality of the playing, and it's, if you have a great sound in the room, it really makes our job quite straightforward. And if the sound in the room isn't there, it's incredibly hard work. So it always starts with the quality of the music being produced.
Yeah.
So how did you manage that integration between the spot mics, the close mics, the individual mics, and the room mics? Was it just a question of balance, or was it a question of sound processing as well? That's one question. And another one is, how did Ricardo and Matt, with their Continuo, who are quite different from the string section, how did that fit into that process?
Well, with the balance and integration of the microphones, I think that the biggest adjustment is rethinking what you're doing with the ambient or the main microphones, and where you would position those microphones and the spacing you would use for those is, under normal circumstances, we know a lot about how orchestras sound in different acoustics, and we've got 70 years worth of recording history and recording techniques which let us understand how to record an orchestra very well. But we kind of really had to throw that all away entirely and kind of just rethink what we were doing, and what the two ways about going about it are: either you go much closer in with your main microphone pair, so kind of right inside the ensemble, or you go much lower and you go a little further back, and it's then integrating the close microphones with that sound requires something we normally wouldn't do. You do have to do a bit of work on the EQ, so perhaps just taking the brightness off the close mics. That's mostly because you've got considerably more close mics than you would normally for a classical recording. So for this handle, normally we wouldn't have any mics on the strings, but we had a mic on every single string player this time. And it doesn't sound very natural if you bring that up into the mix without doing something to it.
And did the harpsichord and theorbo blend easily with that?
They blended wonderfully, actually. But they, I think that's the attack of their sound carries very well, and you hear that anyway. So the approach to miking both those instruments didn't change, actually.
Yeah, it's very interesting, sort of hearing about the I suppose the differences in the sort of spatial setup. Just thinking as a string player myself, and obviously Adrian's violin player, you know, we're used to sharing a stand, and it's a completely different experience. And so, you know, having to do socially distanced playing is it does affect the whole experience, I think. But I'd be interested in your thoughts really on, I mean, everybody said this about playing with people for the first time. Was that, and interestingly, I mean, for me as an amateur player, it's interesting to hear you saying as professionals that you were sort of wondering whether you could still do it or not after some months. I mean, because obviously those doubts plague amateur players as well all the time. So, yeah, I mean, did you feel it was, I don't know, how rewarding was it, you know, to play like that? And I mean, because I look upon that day as quite a special day, really, because it was sort of like a beacon that shone out, you know, in the middle of all this gloom and lockdown misery. For me, it was a very positive experience. I mean, how did you find it? Maybe Ricardo, if you want to go first.
Yes, I felt very energized, and that kept me going for a few weeks. Because I think the most difficult thing about this lockdown, it's the uncertainty. So many gigs and projects were cancelled, and you just don't know when the next one is going to come. And that again, that word anxiety, it just boils at times, and you don't get much relief from that uncertainty, especially us being session musicians and self-employed. So that was really like a balm. That felt wonderful. Not only the act of uh, playing on the day, but like discussed in the live session we had, the public session, the Zoom session we had before. It was very rewarding. The whole process of engaging, playing with other people, and creating the music, it stayed with me for a long time. That feeling good.
Yeah, yeah. No, thanks. Yeah. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, similarly, I think we know what it's like to play music together, and there's a lot about that that's familiar. But well, it had been, I think, before the session, my last concert was, I think it was at Wigmore Hall, like end of September, and that was another one where I really wondered if I could still do it. But then after the session, I can't remember when. I mean, my last concert was just a few weeks, a couple of weeks ago. The first one I did since November. So I think, like Ricardo said, it was, and you mentioned, it's kind of like a beacon in an oasis. It's something to kind of cling on to and just remember how it is. And I thought about it many times. So it wasn't like it was this huge emotional, moving experience. It's sort of been more practical than that. Something to keep you going in your mind.
Yeah.
I was sorry.
Yeah, go on. No, go on, Adrian.
I was quite mindful of that side of things when we did the recording session, because as a violinist in the Philharmonia, lockdown was, well, we stopped working on 15th of March 2020, and then in August we did one project, and by the time we got to November, I'd done a tiny handful of streamed concerts. I had a little bit of experience of playing with the social distance and knowing and having. I had that feeling of, can I do this again? Have I got it? Will I be able to play, to blend with others, to make music well? So when we got to our session for the Songs of Isolation, I knew, it's like an ace. I had an ace up my sleeve. I knew that was how everybody was going to be feeling. As a conductor, I knew that was going to happen. So the first, of course, on the face of it, it was okay. Let's get on with this recording session. This is the first piece. But the way I kind of decided what to play first, what to read first, and what to record first, and to go through the motions like that, was like it had that in mind. And I knew, for example, that people would feel like a bomb, like a watershed of coming back to playing, but at the same time they'd be feeling very unsure of themselves. The singers, the string players, and you guys, just because of not having played again, and everybody would be feeling that. So the first stage of the recording process was to, and it's funny because you don't see that, you don't hear that in the film. When you watch the film, you would never know that these people were feeling like this just minutes before. But it was very much a very targeted kind of recording session or rehearsal, so that the first thing would be to rebuild confidence, to remove the panic, to help people, those who hadn't played with others in many months and who had never played socially distanced, which was the majority of the orchestra, to help them learn these ropes, these new ropes, which is the process that I had been involved with in the months leading up to that. So it was a very valuable experience to have just a handful of concerts, to know technically what was different, but psychologically and emotionally as well, what was there as well. Because you never get a good performance out of people if people aren't feeling good and are feeling confident. So one of the first things to do was to rebuild that, by being maybe more active as a conductor, more demonstrative as a conductor than I normally would be, because I like to let people do their thing and find their way. But experience has shown us in socially distanced orchestras that if you do that, things are just not together because people can't hear what is going on in their vicinity. So this kind of everybody learning how to play again like this was the first objective. And once people had that, then it was possible to begin making music like that and to enjoy a confidence and of making music in this different way. So from that point onwards, when the wheels started to turn, then we were on we had a modus operandi.
I think we were going to talk a bit about the future, weren't we? That was, did we not say that at the very beginning?
Yes, Matt mentioned that. Yes, you're right.
Happy to.
Yes, go on.
Yes, and what we can do better. Yes.
Well, no, I think it's not a case of what we do better. I think it's a case of what might be different moving forward. I know for myself, I mean, I really want to do a lot less traveling, and I know loads of people who feel that way. So, all this getting on planes and trains the whole time, I want to do less of it. And it doesn't mean I want to play less music, or it's nothing to do with that. It's more if we are thinking about the environment seriously, and what are the important things in life, which I think lockdown has made us all think about that and feel it and experience it. I'm really into what can I do on a more local level, or at least in the UK. I mean, Brexit doesn't help, but I think, it's very interesting transitions. I'm doing a lot more. I run a record label. I'm actually getting a lot more into sound engineering, which I'm super excited about. And alongside the playing, I still love the things I've done since the restrictions are beginning to lift. I get such a buzz from performing and sharing music with an audience. But live, what you do is between you and the audience and those four walls. And I kind of like it when it stays there, and then you go away and you do the next thing. But for me, it's definitely more more local level stuff at a really high level. So I dream of local music being being high quality and cool, just as it is if something is grown locally or produced locally. I don't see why music can't be in the same category.
Ricardo?
Yeah, if I may add, one thing that the lockdown taught us as well is that we have to make ways for things to happen. And that's what we all did with Songs of Isolation. And I totally agree with Matt. So many of us are concerned about all this traveling and particularly air travel. Luckily, I mean, fortunately, as far as traveling in Europe is concerned, there are plans for an important link with night trains being reinstated across the European network, and I think they are planning that for 2024, and that will actually come to Edinburgh. Unfortunately, it seems it's going to bypass London. But anyway, yeah. That aside, I've seen many events being a mix of live with an audience and also being broadcast. And I'm actually adopting that format in a conference I'm organizing for October. So it will be both presential, but also broadcast. And even some speakers will have the opportunity to present their paper online, and the others who can attend and are local, they will be in site doing that. So I think we can do the same with performances, perhaps try to work it out in terms of availability, selling tickets, marketing, how it would work. But for me, that's perhaps the way forward.
Everyone's had to up their game with the streaming and the getting used to the technology. So I think you're absolutely right that we can actually integrate this now into live performances, into conferences, and bring the two together.
Adaq and Andrea, what do you think about these things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes for all activities, really. I'm just thinking also about outside of music, my work as well. I mean, that's all gone online, and I think people are amazingly adaptable. And I think it is something that is here to stay. Less. I mean, just on a sort of like day-to-day basis, people going into the office less and working at home more, and just being a bit more centered around where they live. And that'd be great if people could then, form musical communities a bit more where they live. I mean, it's obviously not always possible, but a bit more so than has been. So I think it's there are going to be some positive resonances from this, I think.
It's with online conferences. One of the things I've had access to, which I previously wouldn't have done, are some of the Audio Engineering Society's conferences, which sometimes they rotate between New York, Germany, and London usually. But we normally wouldn't travel to America or to Germany for those, just go to the London ones. But because all the conferences have been online, there's been a huge amount more research papers we've been able to see presented live with discussion. So that in terms of information, we've actually had access to a lot more. But then going back to the idea of local, certainly for our business, traveling with the equipment, Brexit kind of does force for probably the medium term at least, to stay in the UK, because it just doesn't work for us to take a van load of equipment to Europe. So yeah, local is the way for us.
Yeah, for me, the whole pandemic, not just the lockdowns, but the pandemic, after the initial panic of what's going to happen to my livelihood and my industry, it's right. So COVID is here to stay in one form or another. It will be more or less managed and contained, and it will evolve. But I agree with Matt. I think he said, I don't know, before we started recording, that things are not going to go back to what they were. I think for me, and I feel it reflected in what all of you are saying, pre-COVID, I really felt like I was on a treadmill of concerts after concerts after concerts after concerts, with season of concerts, concerts in London, concerts outside London, overseas travel, and recording sessions in Abbey Road and Ayr and places like that, and the odd choir choral concert. So it was really chock-a-block, and the economics of the freelance scene, most major London orchestras are all comprised of self-employed members. So the market really keeps fees right down, which means that people have to work very hard, and orchestras employ management so that the orchestra works hard, so people can earn a living. But that means that the schedule is absolutely relentless. And for me, it had been relentless for 19 years. So when all that suddenly stopped, there was a lot of things that I had wanted to do, or different ways to create and different ways to express myself as an artist, which, just because of the way that we were working, were not available to me, were not an option. Something like making this film, The Songs of Isolation, that we made. That was a really new path, but it was also a path, even though it was new for me, it didn't feel like it was anything I couldn't do, because I kind of knew all the elements of it. I just hadn't combined them in that way before. I had produced music educational videos. I had conducted orchestras. I had done all sorts of different things, but I hadn't put them together that way and created that. And to get the Arts Council funding was just huge. That enabled us to get people like Ricardo, people like Matt inside, just people like Adaq. It's just fabulous to be able to do that. But more importantly than that, it was a real time to reappraise what are we doing, and why are we doing it, and how are we doing it, and should we be doing things differently? Is it possible to do things different? I remember pre-COVID, hardly any musician was digitally literate. A Zoom conference was like, oh my God, I did a Zoom conference, oh yeah, that time my sister got married five years ago, we did a Zoom and now it's an everyday thing. And same with basic recording techniques. I'm not talking professional level, I'm talking, there's a language there that musicians and many others didn't have before, and now we do. I'm really interested to hear what all four of you have said, because they're completely different takes on what has enabled. Adaq saying I can access information from anywhere, it's much more available. Matt saying, how about the homegrown, home cultivated, local music kind of thing. For me, I'm making a series of videos now from the perspective of the first violinist of a top flight professional symphony orchestra, which is something that there isn't information out there. People are expected to, for example, to come to an audition and they practice concertos and there are master classes on how to play concertos, but actually the nuts and bolts of of how a great orchestra plays from the inside, all these kinds of, I would say secrets, but they're not even secrets. It's like, this is how you operate, from the inside. So I've been sitting on that information for years, and now I can see an opportunity to film, to set aside chunks at home where I can film and produce this and then share it. So that's been really, those kinds of things were not possible before. It was just impossible. When would I have time to say, you know what, I'm not going to work this week and earn any money because I'm going to do this instead. But I think the pandemic has taught us a lot about we don't have to do things the way we've been doing them before. We can change, we can make them better, we can design new things and design new conjunctions of things to suit who we are and what we want to do better. And there you go, we've got 5 people in the session today and 5 completely different takes. Positive things can be created going forward. That's amazing.
Thanks very much, everybody. It's been a really interesting discussion, and good luck for the future. And let's hope we can work together on something else soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
for having us. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.